Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan as we look at the second weekend of Deadpool and Wolverine as it continues to break records across the movie world. There's a lot to get to, so let's jump right into it. And the number one movie, of course, was Deadpool and Wolverine, which had a pretty good drop for a movie that opens to over $200 million. The estimate came in at $97 million. I've seen some reports that it might go a little bit higher, but the bottom line is that it was a strong second weekend, and its domestic total is now close to $400 million after just 10 days of release. In second place was Twisters, which dropped 35.3% in its third week, so a bit of that softer landing that we were looking for. It brought in $22.6 million. Its domestic total is getting close to $200 million, and I'll have a lot more to say about Twisters and its worldwide total later on in the show. In third place was M. Night Shyamalan's Trap, which came in a little bit under where people saw it, even going into the weekend at $15.6 million. This was the second lowest opening for M. Night Shyamalan, just ahead of last year's Knock at the Cabin, and his last three movies have been his lowest opening wide releases. In fourth place is Despicable Me 4 in week number 5. It dropped 22.9% for another $11.2 million. Its domestic total is now at nearly $315 million. Then we have Inside Out 2 in week 8. It dropped 22.3% with a $6.7 million weekend total and a domestic total right around $626 million. Coming in sixth place was Harold and the Purple Crayon. This movie was just DOA. It brought in $6 million. It came in behind the other two family films that have been out for 5 and 8 weeks respectively. So that's pretty bad. In seventh place was Long Legs, which continued to hold well in week number 4. It dropped 38.9% from last weekend for a $4.1 million total. Its domestic total is now up at $66.9 million. In eighth place was The Firing Squad. This is a movie that was aimed at the Christian audience. It made $1.6 million over the weekend. In ninth place was A Quiet Place Day 1. It dropped 55.2% to bring in $1.4 million. Its total is at $137 million, so it's going to fall shy of A Quiet Place and A Quiet Place Part 2, but still do well considering the budget that it was made for. And in 10th place is a film from India called Daru Na Pinda Hove. This is a Punjabi language film from India about a man struggling with alcohol who finds himself taking care of a young girl. So let's break down a few things about these movies in the top 10. And of course, we are going to start with Deadpool and Wolverine. It had the 8th biggest second weekend of all time domestically, just behind Inside Out 2 from earlier this year and just ahead of Barbie from last year. Star Wars The Force Awakens still has the best second weekend performance of all time, followed by Avengers Endgame, Avengers Infinity War, Black Panther, and Jurassic World. That's your top 5. But if you were to adjust these numbers for inflation, Deadpool and Wolverine would not be among the 10 biggest second weekend performers ever. Star Wars The Force Awakens, Avengers Endgame, and Avengers Infinity War are still your top 3. Jurassic World moves up to 4th place with an adjusted total of $141.2 million, followed by The Avengers back in 2012, Black Panther at number 6. Then we have Spider-Man. Its second weekend in 2002 brought in an adjusted total of $124.7 million. Shrek 2 in 2004 brought in $120 million in its second weekend adjusted for inflation. Beauty and the Beast back in 2017. It always shocks me to realize, or I guess I should say remember, just how big of a box office hit this movie was, because it doesn't seem like it gets talked about that much. But it brought in $115.9 million adjusted in weekend number 2 back in 2017. And then we have Avatar back on Christmas weekend of 2009, which brought in an adjusted second weekend total of $110.7 million. But one record that Deadpool and Wolverine did definitively break was the highest grossing R-rated film of all time domestically. The Passion of the Christ held this record for about 20 years, and Deadpool and Wolverine broke it in 10 days. $395.5 million now makes Deadpool and Wolverine the highest grossing R-rated film of all time domestically. It did what the first Deadpool movie could not do. That moves The Passion of the Christ down to 2nd, the first Deadpool down to 3rd, American Sniper down to number 4, Joker to number 5, and it bumps last summer's Oppenheimer off of the top 5 R-rated grossers of all time domestic list. Also looking at the franchise tracker for all of the X-Men movies, Deadpool and Wolverine is now clearly and easily the #1 highest grossing movie in the history of the X-Men franchise at $395.5 million. It was able to jump over Deadpool and Deadpool 2 again in just about 10 days. X-Men The Last Stand is now the highest grossing X-Men film proper at #4, followed by X-Men Days of Future Past, Logan, and X2 X-Men United. If we were to look at this franchise adjusted for inflation, Deadpool and Wolverine still has a little bit more work to do. It's about $80 million behind the first Deadpool if you do these inflation-adjusted totals, but it should be there sometime this week. So by this time next week, Deadpool and Wolverine will be the unquestioned champion of the X-Men franchise, whether you adjust for inflation or not. X2 X-Men United and X-Men The Last Stand round out the top 5 adjusted for inflation there. And looking at the MCU franchise tracker by domestic gross, Deadpool and Wolverine is all the way up at #12. It's past movies like Spider-Man Far From Home, last summer's Guardians of the Galaxy, as well as Thor Love and Thunder, the first Guardians film, and many, many more. And it's actually just behind Captain America Civil War and Iron Man 3. So by next week, we could be looking at Deadpool and Wolverine as high as, I think, #6. And then the question is going to be, can it break that $600 million barrier to join the top 5 in franchise history? Looking at the MCU adjusted for inflation, Deadpool and Wolverine is at #18. It has passed Thor Ragnarok, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Captain America the Winter Soldier, Doctor Strange, and others. And it's just behind Spider-Man Homecoming, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and the original Guardians of the Galaxy film. By this time next week, I think that we'll probably be looking at it somewhere in that $500 million Captain Marvel range at least, which would put it in the top 10 adjusted for inflation, and then we'll see where it goes from there. While we're on the subject of Deadpool and Wolverine, a couple of revisions from last week's show. As I mentioned, it did actually come in higher than the estimates originally had it. So it will go in the record books as the 6th best 3-day opening weekend of all time. It was able to jump over both the Avengers and Jurassic World. The top 5 are Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man No Way Home, Avengers Infinity War, Star Wars The Force Awakens, and Star Wars The Last Jedi. That uptick as far as the opening weekend also put it as the 4th highest grossing MCU opening weekend of all time, behind Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man No Way Home, and Avengers Infinity War. And when we look at July opening weekends adjusted for inflation, that boost for Deadpool and Wolverine puts it at #5. Even when you do adjust for inflation, it put it over Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. So the top 5 July opening weekends adjusted for inflation are Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, 2019's The Lion King, The Dark Knight back in 2008, The Dark Knight Rises back in 2012, and now Deadpool and Wolverine. So the big question as far as the summer of 2024 right now is, what will be #1? It seemed like Inside Out 2 had it locked up, but Deadpool and Wolverine has gotten out to a great start. When you look at these two movies as far as cumulative gross day by day, you can see that Deadpool and Wolverine started out with a lead over Inside Out 2 and has maintained that lead over 10 days. However, I'm not ready to call this contest just yet because Inside Out 2 has had phenomenal staying power over these last couple months. So I think that we're going to know a lot more about this race next week when we see these two movies through 17 days of release. I think it's going to be a very close race between Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine for the #1 film of the summer. But I'm not counting out Inside Out 2 just yet, and we'll see how this develops over the next few weeks. As far as a couple of other movies that are in the top 10, I wanted to note that Longlegs now has the 3rd highest gross for an original intellectual property domestically this year. It has passed both Challengers and The Beekeeper and will soon pass Civil War to become the 2nd highest grossing original film of 2024, behind only If, which made $111.1 million earlier this summer. Dropping out of the top 10 this week are 4 movies as of right now. Bad Boys Ride or Die, according to the estimates, is out after 8 weeks, but it's a very close race. I think it's possible that it could flip back into the top 10 when final numbers come in, and if that happens, then I'll adjust these numbers next week. Fly Me to the Moon is out of the top 10 after 3 weeks, and then The Fabulous Four and Ryan are both out after 1 week. And should Bad Boys Ride or Die have actually ended its ride in the top 10, it will tie with 4 other movies for third place as far as longest runs in the top 10 this year. It's tied right now with The Beekeeper, Godzilla Kong the New Empire, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and The Fall Guy. Dune Part 2 still has second place locked up at 9 weeks, and Kung Fu Panda 4 right now is at number 1 at 10 weeks, although we'll see if Inside Out 2 is able to break that 10-week streak. Looking at the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, for the second consecutive week, Fly Me to the Moon lost the most theaters with 894. It's now playing in just 420 theaters. Nice. A Quiet Place Day 1 lost 893 theaters. It is just barely still in wide release. It's in 1,039. Longlegs lost 580 theaters, though it's still in 2,150 theaters. Bad Boys Ride or Die dropped out of wide release. It lost 569 theaters. It's still playing in 437. And Inside Out 2 lost its first chunk of theaters. 535 theaters went away this past weekend. It's still in 2,615. Looking at what I like to call the road to recovery, the blue line is the box office weekend average for 2015 to 2019. The red line is the box office average for 2021 to 2023. And the dotted black line are the box office totals for this year. And you can see that for a second consecutive weekend, we're ahead of not only where we have been, but where we were pre-pandemic. So that's good news for the marketplace. It doesn't redeem the slow start to this year, but it certainly helps. The highest grossing film for the 2015 to 2019 window was Fast and Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw, which was an okay-sized hit several years ago. The highest performing film for the 2021 to 2023 window was the third weekend of Barbie last summer. Let's turn our attention now to everything outside of the domestic marketplace. These are the top 5 films internationally. At number 1, no surprise, was Deadpool and Wolverine, which added another $110.5 million to its international total, followed by China's Successor at $28.1 million. Despicable Me 4 comes in third place at $26.8 million, followed by Inside Out 2 in fourth at $20.5 million. And in fifth place is a film from China called Decoded. It's from Siqing Chen, the director of the massively popular Detective Chinatown series, and it co-stars John Cusack in a story about a code breaker during World War II. When we take those international grosses, we combine them with our domestic numbers, we get the top 5 films worldwide. At number 1 was Deadpool and Wolverine with another $207.5 million added to its worldwide total. That's a drop of 52.7% worldwide, so a similar hold to the one that we saw domestically. Despicable Me 4 holds well. It dropped 26.5% for a $38.1 million worldwide weekend. Then we have Twisters, which is still being driven mainly by its domestic gross. It dropped 35% for a $30.1 million worldwide weekend. We're going to break down Twisters and its worldwide gross in just a minute. Successor brings in $28.6 million. It is now open in limited release here in the US with a 41.4% drop from last weekend. And Inside Out 2 drops just 12% from last weekend worldwide to bring in another $27.2 million. And when we look at the highest grossing worldwide weekends of the year, this isn't just opening weekends, this is all weekends overall. Deadpool and Wolverine now has the first and fourth highest grossing weekend of the year at $444.1 million and $207.5 million. Numbers 2 and 3 are held by Inside Out 2 with its opening weekend of $294.2 million and its second weekend of $265.6 million. Remember that its release was a little staggered, which is why not everything was lumped into that first opening weekend. And then in fifth place is Godzilla Kong the New Empire with an opening of $194 million worldwide back in March. Let's look at the X-Men franchise worldwide, and much like it did domestically, Deadpool and Wolverine has overtaken all other movies to become the highest-grossing X-Men movie of all time at $824 million. That bumps Deadpool 2 down to second place and the original Deadpool down to third. X-Men Days of Future Past is the highest-grossing X-Men movie proper worldwide at $747.8 million, followed by Logan in fifth place and X-Men Apocalypse in sixth place. Looking at the MCU by worldwide gross, Deadpool is now the 17th highest grossing MCU film of all time worldwide. It has passed movies like Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor Love and Thunder, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and Iron Man 2. And it is very close to passing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Thor Ragnarok, and Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I think by this time next week, we could see it as high as number 11, topping the gross of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And then the question becomes really not if it's going to break $1 billion, it's going to. The question, I think, is going to be how far above $1 billion does it get? And is it able to get up into Iron Man 3 range or even Black Panther range at $1.2, $1.3 billion? One chart that Deadpool and Wolverine has entered but has not yet dominated, although I think it's going to, is the highest grossing R-rated films of all time worldwide chart. It has, as I mentioned, bypassed the worldwide grosses of Deadpool and Deadpool 2. That puts it at number 3 all time, but it's still about $150 million behind Oppenheimer at number 2 at $976.9 million. And then Joker, which currently holds the number 1 spot on this chart at $1,074 million. I think that Deadpool and Wolverine is going to be number 1 here. It's going to displace Joker, but this is one of the only charts where it is not yet number 1, although it certainly seems well on its way. One all-time chart that I did want to reference is the highest grossing films of all time worldwide, and that's because we now have a new top 10 movie. Inside Out 2 is now the 10th highest grossing film of all time at $1.555 billion. And if it can make another $90 million or so, then it can put to rest the whole debate around the highest grossing animated film of all time, because it would then pass 2019's The Lion King for number 9. I don't know if it's going to get there, but I think that it is certainly a possibility, especially if it continues to hold like it has been. As I mentioned, The Lion King's at number 9, Jurassic World is at number 8, Spider-Man No Way Home is at number 7, Avengers Infinity War is at number 6. Then we have Star Wars The Force Awakens at number 5, and then a James Cameron fest at numbers 1 through 4. We have Titanic at number 4, Avatar The Way of Water at number 3, The Odd Movie Out, Avengers Endgame at number 2, and then Avatar, the first film, at number 1. So while we're talking about worldwide grosses, I wanted to talk a little bit about Twisters, because it is a very interesting film from a box office perspective. It has been a surprising hit here domestically, but it has also been a letdown as far as its international grosses, which means that it's sort of a paradox. It is both simultaneously a box office hit and a bit of a box office disappointment. So I wanted to look at where it stands when you look not just at its domestic gross, but also its worldwide gross. So this is the profit breakdown on Twisters. Again, these are all estimated numbers, and they do not include ancillaries or other income like premium video on demand or brand deals. And you can see right away, really, the weakness that it has in the international markets. It only made $2.6 million in China. That's about $500,000 back to the investors. And its international gross from other countries right now is only at about $77.2 million, which brings back just about $30 million to the investors. But the domestic returns have been strong. About $71 million coming back from domestic week 1, about $29 million coming back from domestic week 2, and $11 million so far from its third weekend of release. Twisters had a reported budget around $155 million. You throw in another $100 million for advertising, that puts your costs at $255 million. The movie's gross returns right now are at $274.3 million. Because it is so heavily weighted toward domestic, a lot of that is coming back to the studio, $143.9 million. But when you offset that against the costs, right now it has a theatrical shortfall of over $100 million, which might be surprising because here it seems like Twisters is a pretty big hit, but that's just not the case around the world. So it will be interesting to see how Universal decides to handle Twisters going forward, because it is a hit here, but not so much elsewhere. And I really think that the thing that made it such a strong performer here, or helped to make it such a strong performer, which is that it is heavily tied to American culture and country music and the middle of America and all of that stuff, I think that's one reason why it is not resonating with worldwide audiences. I think the movie's eventually going to make money, especially because this has been a very popular film here in the US. So I think it's going to have a lot of PVOD and rental revenue and all of that kind of stuff, but it is not going to be a runaway hit in the theatrical window. And really, I think one of the big losers here is Warner Brothers, because Warner Brothers took the international distribution for Twisters and they weren't really able to deliver on that, which means the movie wasn't really able to deliver back to them either. So a lot of very interesting things going on here with Twisters. A hit in the US, not so much around the world. And what happens next? Well, we'll have to see. We've got a lot more to talk about, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsor for this video. This video is brought to you by ExpressVPN. It's summer and it's not unusual to see huge billboards all over the place promoting the latest big movie. But what if those billboards featured all of your passwords and credit card numbers instead? Not so great, huh? If you wouldn't leave your data out in the open like that, you shouldn't leave it out in the open when you're using your devices. Every time you connect to an unencrypted public Wi-Fi network, your data is up for grabs, and any amateur hacker on the same network can steal all those private pieces of information I mentioned and more. ExpressVPN stops these hackers by creating a secure, encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet. And it's super easy to use. All you have to do is open the app, click one button, and you're protected. Plus, you can use ExpressVPN on your phone, laptop, tablet, however you like to access the internet. If you watch this channel for a long time, you've seen me doing reviews from hotels across the country, and it's great to know that I can connect to any hotel's Wi-Fi network and not have to worry about whether anyone else can steal my data. You actually don't know how much you worry about stuff like this until you don't have to worry about it anymore. If I'm using my computer, I can guarantee you that ExpressVPN is open and enabled. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/Murrell. That's expressvpn.com/Murrell, and you can get an extra 3 months free. expressvpn.com/Murrell. Before we look at some of these specialty charts from this weekend, I wanted to make one quick revision to last week's show beyond the revisions I already made about Deadpool and Wolverine's opening weekend, and that's to the per theater average chart. It's a small tweak. First of all, we got those final numbers in. It took Deadpool and Wolverine's per theater average over $50,000, which is impressive. DD still came in second place at $41,461 per theater. And then we had one small change there at number 5. There has been an ongoing re-release of Seven Samurai, remastered in 4K. That actually came in 5th place with $4,633 per theater instead of the film that was listed previously. All right, let's take a look at the summer box office before we get further into this past weekend. These are the top 10 summer movies so far. Inside Out 2 remains number 1. Deadpool and Wolverine climbs 1 spot to number 2. Despicable Me 4 drops to number 3. Twisters is up 2 spots to become the number 4 movie of the summer. Bad Boys Ride or Die drops down 1 to number 5. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes drops down 1 to number 6. A Quiet Place Day 1 stays at number 7, followed by If, The Fall Guy, and the Garfield movie. So no movie dropping out of this summer box office top 10. When we look at my predictions, I predicted Deadpool and Wolverine to be the second highest grossing film of the summer. That's where it is right now. We'll see if that's where it ends up. Despicable Me 4, I had picked number 1, and Inside Out 2, I had picked at number 3. Those flip-flop. My optimistic, kind of risky pick of Twisters at number 4 is paying off right now, because that's exactly where Twisters is at this moment, the number 4 movie of the summer. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is at number 6. I predicted it to be the 5th highest grossing movie of the summer. Furiosa Mad Max Saga was a bad pick. I put it there at number 6. A Quiet Place Day 1 stays locked there at number 7. That's where I predicted it. Then we have the Garfield movie and Bad Boys Ride or Die. Bad Boys obviously will stay on the summer top 10. I don't think that the Garfield movie will. And then Alien Romulus is my only pick that is yet to open. We're going to see that here in a couple weeks, and we'll see if that helps to boost my summer top 10 picks overall. All right, let's look at some of the specialty charts from this past weekend. First of all, these are your top per theater averages as of the time I'm doing the show. Deadpool and Wolverine remains at number 1 with $22,931 per theater. In each of its 4,230 theaters, it actually added a few theaters from last weekend. In second place was a kind of hybrid documentary thriller called War Game, which brought in $15,289 per theater in its one theater. War Game features real former U.S. officials simulating what would happen if there were a coup following a disputed presidential election. And you know what? I think I'm good on politics this year and worrying about things like that. So, I think I'm going to pass on War Game. Maybe 2025, 2026, I might check this movie out. In third place is Sing Sing, which brought in $9,607 in each of its 18 theaters. They are expanding this movie very slowly. In fourth place was DD, which expanded to 47 theaters and brought in $9,362 per theater. And in fifth place was Twisters, which brought in $5,649 per theater in each of its 4,009 theaters. Let's look at the limited release films from this past weekend. These are movies that are playing in 1,000 theaters or fewer. At number 1 is The Firing Squad, which was a top 10 movie at $1.6 million, playing in 702 theaters. In second place was Daru Napinda Hove, which was also a top 10 movie, bringing in $615,000 in 118 theaters. Blackpink World Tour, which was a special limited engagement, it actually had some showtimes earlier in the week, comes in third place in 300 theaters at $580,000. Then we have Successor. I mentioned that it has a limited release now here in the US. It played in 92 theaters and brought in just under $500,000. And right behind it is Kneecap, a movie that I really enjoyed out of the Sundance Film Festival this year. It opened in 703 theaters and brought in $492,000. And hey, let's look at this chart. We haven't looked at it in several weeks now. These are the 2024 limited release top 10 grossers. So these are movies that played in 1,000 theaters or fewer. If it started in limited release and then expanded to 1,000 theaters, I froze the gross at the point at which it crossed that 1,000 theater threshold. And American Fiction remains the highest grossing limited release film of the year at $8.9 million before it crossed that 1,000 theater threshold. The Zone of Interest is in second place at $8.5 million. Then we have Poor Things, which made $8 million before crossing over into wide release. Fighter and Hanuman remain at numbers 4 and 5. Then we have Kinds of Kindness. So Yorgos Lanthimos has 2 films on this list. Kinds of Kindness right now is at number 6 at $5,038,000. Then we have I Saw the TV Glow, which ended at $4.9 million, good enough for number 7 on this list. Origin drops down 2 spots to number 8. Perfect Days is down 1 spot to number 9. All of Us Strangers is down 3 spots to number 10, and Gunter Karam and the 2024 Oscar shorts are off of the list for the top 10 limited release grossers of the year. Let's look at the 2024 annual domestic box office. The top 3 movies of the year are also the top 3 movies of the summer: Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, which is up 2 spots to number 2, and Despicable Me 4, which is down 1 spot to number 3. Then we have Dune Part 2 at number 4, Godzilla Kong the New Empire barely hanging on to number 5, but Twisters is hot on its trail. It's at number 6, up 3 spots from last week at $195.5 million. Kung Fu Panda 4 is down to number 7, Bad Boys Ride or Die is down to number 8, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is down to number 9, and A Quiet Place Day 1 stays at number 10 at $137.4 million. As far as the top 10 grossers worldwide, Deadpool and Wolverine is up big from last week. It's up 6 spots to number 2 at $824 million. Inside Out 2 is in first still at $1.55 billion. Then we have Despicable Me 4 in third. Dune Part 2 down 2 spots to number 4 at $711.8 million. Godzilla Kong the New Empire is down to number 5. Kung Fu Panda 4 is at number 6. YOLO's at 7. Pegasus 2 is at 8. Bad Boys Ride or Die has actually bypassed the worldwide gross of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. It is at the cusp of $400 million worldwide. That bumps it up to number 9. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is down 1 spot to number 10. And when we look at the 10 highest grossing movies in the world over the last 365 days from August 5th, 2023 to August 5th, 2024, Deadpool and Wolverine is up big here too. It's up 8 spots from last weekend to number 2, followed by Despicable Me 4 and Dune Part 2. Wonka is one of only 2 movies from 2023 that remain on this chart. It's at number 5 with $632.3 million, followed by Godzilla Kong the New Empire and Kung Fu Panda 4. No More Bets will rotate off of this chart next week. It's currently at number 8, followed by 2 other films from China, YOLO and Pegasus 2. Before we go, as always, I want to take a look at a weekend in box office history, and in many ways, this seems like a summer that has featured a lot of sleeper, low-budget horror films. There's another one that's opening later this week. So I wanted to go back 25 years to the breakout weekend of one of the most legendary breakout horror hits of all time, and one of the most legendary independent movies of all time. This is the weekend of July 30th to August 1st, 1999. Now, according to the record books, Runaway Bride was the number 1 movie of the weekend at $35 million, but the real story was The Blair Witch Project. In its 3rd week of release, it exploded onto screens nationwide with a 1,376% increase of business and a $29.2 million weekend. This was such an amazing story. This movie came out of nowhere and became a pop culture phenomenon. It eventually ended up grossing $140.5 million, became one of the most talked about movies in a year where there were a lot of great movies to talk about. In third place was Deep Blue Sea, which opened the same weekend as the Blair Witch Project. It actually opened a little bit earlier in the week to get a jump on the weekend. It made $19.1 million in its first 3-day weekend. In fourth place was The Haunting, which made $15.2 million in its second weekend. Some of that was my money because I was sold tickets to go see the Blair Witch Project by the guy at the ticket booth, even though I was 16 years old, but I got carded at the actual ticket taker's place, which means that I couldn't go see the Blair Witch Project, and instead I went with my friends to see The Haunting instead. That was a big downgrade. I did eventually get to see the Blair Witch Project with parental approval. Oh, those were the days. In fifth place was Inspector Gadget. In its second weekend of release, it dropped 35.4% for a $14 million weekend. It would eventually end up at around $97 million. But what would those game-changing numbers look like in today's money? Well, that's why we have the handy inflation button. And when we hit that button, we see that Runaway Bride opens to an adjusted total of $66.1 million for a final of right around $287.1 million adjusted. The Blair Witch Project opened to an adjusted total of $55 million on its way to a $265 million domestic final. Deep Blue Sea opens to an adjusted $36 million on its way to a $138.8 million final gross adjusted. Then we have The Haunting in fourth place at $28.7 million adjusted for inflation, and Inspector Gadget at $26.6 million adjusted for inflation. So 5 movies above $25 million in the top 5. Hollywood would kill for those kinds of numbers right now. So that wraps up our box office numbers. Let's quickly take a look at the streaming numbers for the past week, and we will start with Netflix. This is the latest data we have, which is from the week of July 22nd through the 28th. The number one most watched program globally on Netflix for that week was the Harry Connick Jr. film Find Me Falling in its second weekend of release at 16.09 million views. In second place was Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Remember, Sony licenses their films to Netflix, and this is yet another one that debuts high on the Netflix charts. Cobra Kai Season 6 brought in 9.47 million views at number 3, followed by Trolls Band Together at just over 8 million views. In fifth place was Non-Negotiable. This is a film from Mexico about a hostage negotiator who has to work out a deal to free the kidnapped president. Non-Negotiable brought in 7.17 million views. Land of Bad comes in 6th place. Dirty Pop comes in 7th place. It brought in about 5.6 million views. It's a docuseries about Lou Pearlman, the mogul behind the rise of 90s boy bands like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, who was eventually convicted of massive fraud and financial wrongdoing. In 8th place was Master of the House Season 1, which is a series from Thailand with what seems like kind of a Knives Out type struggle between a dead tycoon's family and the housekeeper that he married shortly before his death. Blame the Game, the Netflix film, comes in at number 9 at 4.7 million views, and then Beverly Hills Cop Axel F stays in the top 10 at 4.48 million views. And when we look at the most watched movies on Netflix globally in 2024, Beverly Hills Cop is moving up that list. It's now at number 6 with 76.09 million views. That bumps Atlas down to number 7 at 72.55 million views. The top 5 movies for now remain unchanged, with Damsel at number 1, Lift at number 2, Society of the Snow at number 3, Under Paris at number 4, and A Family Affair at number 5. And when we look at the most watched 2024 Netflix programs globally, both series and movies, you can see how it all blends together. Damsel remains the most watched Netflix program of the year with its 138 million views, followed by Bridgerton Season 3 at 101.8 million. Then we have Lift and Society of the Snow at numbers 3 and 4, Fool Me Once at number 5, Under Paris at number 6, Baby Reindeer at number 7, A Family Affair at number 8, Beverly Hills Cop Axel F breaks onto the chart at number 9 with 76.09 million views. We'll see if it can overtake A Family Affair next week. That moves Atlas, the Jennifer Lopez film, down to number 10 at 72.55 million views. Let's turn our attention now to the Nielsen charts, which cover domestic viewing only and are also delayed by about a month. But I'm glad that we were just talking about Axel F because these Nielsen charts cover the first week of release for Axel F. And it was actually the most watched program, streaming movie or series of the week. Let's look first at the 10 most watched streaming movies for July 1st through the 7th, 2024. And Beverly Hills Cop Axel F is number one with a bullet at 34.1 million hours watched. That bumps Family Affair down to number two at 17.5 million hours watched. In third place was Paw Patrol the movie, which is available on both Netflix and Paramount Plus with 8.7 million hours watched. And keep in mind, this is viewing data for the first week of the new month, which means that you see a lot of new movies hitting this chart because they are just usually hitting Netflix. Warcraft is in fourth place at 8.5 million hours watched on Netflix. Then we have Godzilla Kong the New Empire's debut on Max. It brought in just over 8 million hours watched. Inside Out remains in the top 10 on Disney Plus at number 6, followed by Independence Day on Hulu. This was the week of July 4th, so this is no shocker, at 4.9 million hours watched. Minions is at number 8, Trigger Warnings at number 9, and Moana is at number 10. And when we look at the top 5 streaming movie debuts of the year as far as hours watched, this is all viewing data courtesy of Nielsen. Beverly Hills Cop Axel F had the biggest streaming movie debut of the year at 34.1 million hours watched. That is above Roadhouse's 22 million hours watched back in March. The first week of Damsel's release at 20.1 million hours, also back in March. Madam Web's release on Netflix back in mid-May was at 19.3 million hours watched. That's good enough for number 4. And then the first week of the year saw The Equalizer 3 debuting to 16.9 million hours watched on Netflix. Of course, there is some variability as far as release patterns. Some of these movies came out on a Wednesday, some of these movies came out on a Friday. So this does all tend to even out over time, but still, that doesn't really make Beverly Hills Cop Axel F's viewing data any less impressive. When we look at the biggest streaming movie weekends, regardless of whether it was release weekend or not, Beverly Hills Cop Axel F is still easily number one with its 34.1 million hours watched. It's about 9 million hours ahead of the second week of release of Damsel, which was a full week of availability at 25.7 million hours watched. And third place was the first week of Roadhouse on Amazon, followed by the first week of Damsel and the first week of Madam Web on Netflix. And not only was Beverly Hills Cop Axel F the best streaming debut of the year for a movie, it was one of the best streaming movie debuts since Nielsen began reporting data back in 2020. It came in at number 7, just behind the debut weekend of Encanto on Disney Plus, and just ahead of the debut weekend of Don't Look Up when it came out on Netflix. And Don't Look Up was, of course, a huge streaming hit. That bumps Leave the World Behind's second week down to number 9, and Avatar: The Way of Water down to number 10. The first weekend of Leave the World Behind is now off this chart entirely. And as far as the top 5 streaming movie performances, according to Nielsen, at number 1 is the second week of Glass Onion at 48.1 million hours watched, followed by the debut of Hocus Pocus 2, the debut of Black Panther: Wakanda Forever on Disney Plus at number 3, the debut of Wonder Woman 1984, which, keep in mind, was a hybrid theatrical streaming release at 37.5 million hours watched, and then the debut of Glass Onion on Netflix, rounding out the top 5 at 37 million hours watched. So Glass Onion taking up 2 of the top 5 as far as weekly performances for a movie on streaming. When we look at the most watched streaming movies of the year through July 7th, according to Nielsen, the top 5 remains the same, with the Super Mario Brothers easily at number 1 at 119.5 million hours watched. But Inside Out 2 is now in the top 10. It comes in at number 6 with 39 million hours watched. That bumps down Lift, Wish, Atlas, and Madam Web. Oppenheimer, which just made the chart last week, is now off the chart, and I will tell you, looking at the data, that Beverly Hills Cop Axel F will almost certainly, I think will certainly, be on this chart when we look at the data coming in for the next week. Let's look at the 10 most watched streaming shows for July 1st through the 7th. At number 1 is Suits, which seems like a flashback to last summer with 24.9 million hours watched. The reason Suits is back at number 1 is because its final season, which previously had only been available on Peacock, hit Netflix on July 1st. So a lot of people jumping in to watch that final season, not on Peacock, but on Netflix. House of the Dragon comes in second place at 21.6 million hours watched. The season just wrapped up last night, and the conversation around it is as, I would say robust as it probably deserves to be. Your Honor comes in third place at 20.4 million hours watched, followed by The Bear at 20.1 million hours watched, and Dexter at just over 20 million hours watched. So a lot of people watching a lot of streaming shows for this weekend of July 1st to the 7th. The Boys comes in sixth place at 18.7 million million hours watched, followed by Bluey at number 7, Grey's Anatomy at number 8, Family Guy at number 9, and returning to the top 10 is Bob's Burgers. Family Guy and Bob's Burgers have really been breakouts since Nielsen readjusted their streaming metrics to list shows on Hulu more easily. And I wanted to note quickly that with those numbers coming in for the latest season of The Boys, it has now overtaken Reacher to become the most viewed Amazon Prime program since Nielsen reporting began back in 2020 at 272.7 million hours watched, and that number is only going to go up because we still have a few weeks left in The Boys season 4 run as far as Nielsen data reporting goes. So Reacher's down at number 2, Jack Ryan's at 3, Fallout's at number 4, Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, you would think will be going up this chart soon because it will debut a new season later this month. The Wheel of Time is at number 6, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel at number 7, The Terminal List is at number 8, The Summer I Turned Pretty is at number 9, and Mr. and Mrs. Smith is at number 10. When we look at Nielsen's top 20 streaming shows broken down by hours watched per available episode for the week of July 1st through the 7th, at number 1 is Supercell, which had 2.24 million hours of watch time for each of its 6 available episodes. And second is The Man with 1,000 Kids, a Netflix docuseries that brought in 1.84 million hours watched per episode. It put out 3 episodes. House of the Dragon comes in third at 1.54 million hours watched per episode. It's up to 14 episodes in its weekly release cycle. Then we have Worst Roommate Ever at 1.28 million hours watched per episode, and Your Honor at 1.02 million hours watched per episode. Owning Manhattan, a real estate show on Netflix, came in 6th place at 804,000 hours watched per episode, followed by The Bear at 717,000 hours per episode, The Boys at 625,000 hours per episode, Bridgerton at 436,000 hours per episode, and then the revival of The Mole on Netflix. If you can find US episodes of The Mole back from the early 2000s when it was hosted by Anderson Cooper, watch them. It is like a cultural time capsule for the early 2000s. It should be noted that The Acolyte is not on any of these charts because it yet again failed to make the top 10 original streaming show list on the Nielsen charts. Looking overall at the most watched library streaming series of the year, these are the non-original series that are available on various streaming platforms. Bluey is at number 1. It's also the overall most watched series of the year at 530.2 million hours, followed by Grey's Anatomy, NCIS, Young Sheldon, and Family Guy. Criminal Minds is at number 6. Suits is currently at number 7. We'll see if it's able to start climbing back up this chart due to that new season availability on Netflix. Your Honor moves up 1 to number 8 at 145.3 million hours watched. Bob's Burgers stays at number 9, and The Big Bang Theory drops down to number 10. Looking at the most watched original streaming series of the year through July 7th, Bridgerton's at number 1. Overall, it is the 5th most watched series of the year, followed by Fallout, which is the 9th most watched series of the year, and Love is Blind, which right now is the 10th most watched series of the year, but number 3 as far as original streaming series. Fool Me Once is at number 4. Avatar: The Last Airbender rounds out the top 5. Then we have The Gentleman and Reacher. Evil moves up 1 spot to number 8. Three Body Problem moves down 1 spot to number 9. And The Boys is now one of the 10 most watched original streaming series of the year. It comes in at number 10, dropping Griselda out. And that wraps us up for Charts with Dan this week, looking ahead at some of the things that are coming out in the week ahead, both on streaming and in theaters. This Thursday on Netflix, the 4th and final season of The Umbrella Academy will premiere. Then on Apple TV Plus on Friday, The Instigators, which had a limited theatrical release this past weekend, will be available for streaming around the world. Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles will hit Paramount Plus on Friday. This is a continuation of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. It's not a movie, it is a series, but it features the same versions of these characters and a lot of the same voice actors. Hitting select theaters this Friday is the Milli Vanilli biopic Girl You Know It's True. Also hitting select theaters this Friday and also hitting Netflix is a great documentary that came out of the Sundance Film Festival called Daughters, which is about a group of convicts who are allowed to have a daddy-daughter dance inside of their prison. It is a tearjerker, but it's also a really, really good documentary. Then hitting theaters everywhere on Friday are a trio of movies. We have It Ends With Us, which I think is going to surprise a lot of people as far as its box office strength. We also have Borderlands, which I want to see to know just exactly what the hell this movie is. And then also opening on Friday is Cuckoo. This is yet another low-budget horror film from Neon, Can it repeat the surprise success of Longlegs? It has the same kind of buzz around it. I'm planning to see all 3 of these movies and bringing you reviews of all 3 of them right here on the channel this week. And finally, coming up on Sunday and then next Monday is Lawrence of Arabia, which will be hitting theaters as part of a Fathom event. I think that everyone who loves movies should see Lawrence of Arabia on the big screen at least once in their life. However, this is also a Fathom event. They do not have a great track record as far as presentation for a lot of their movies, so I will say that if they mess this up, I will personally storm their HQ for defiling one of the great movies in cinematic history. And that wraps it up for this week's Charts with Dan. Be sure to stay tuned right here to the channel for reviews of a lot of the movies that I talked about that are coming out this week. And of course, next week, I'll be talking about the box office returns on all of these different movies. Thanks so much for spending part of your Monday with me. Be sure to check out the description below for more info about my sponsor, ExpressVPN. And until next time, stay safe. Bye.